to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops.
And Omari Psycho for the second, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. Wes is actually joining us today after some much deserved and earned time off to welcome little Winona into the Davenport household. I think Winona and Jill and everybody are doing well. Wes was giving us the scouting report ahead of the show. Omari was getting the scoop on how this all works and goes down. And so we are very happy to have Wes back. Obviously, be listening to him and Blake Silverman on the Pin Down over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel. Make sure you are reading all of O2's work on the Detroit Free Press. That stuff is only going to become more important as we get into the stretch run of the season and into the playoffs. And then if you have it in you, and because it's completely free, go subscribe to the Motor City Hoops Substack over there where I have notes and analysis after every game. Yes, we are a little late. Good afternoon from us. This was actually not my fault. Oftentimes recently, it has been my fault when we are late. I was actually on time today, but we will have Shawn Windsor join us in just a little bit, but he was running a little bit behind. He's got some stuff going on. He'll probably catch segments 2 and 3 of the show. MC313, shout out to Wes and little Wes squared. So I love it. Little Winona. So everybody's doing well. The puppy's doing well. I know nobody wants to hear about that. O2, how are you doing after? Listen, these are big life things we're talking about with the baby, but traveling is also sometimes a big life thing. And yesterday was not a very fun thing for you.
Yeah, I don't have any baby updates, no kid or puppy updates. Those things are a bit more fun. I had probably my worst travel day since I've been doing this job, which is crazy.
Okay, so I was interested, not sorry to cut you off, but like, does this happen, O2? You've been traveling now for 7 or 8 years on the beat between Memphis and Detroit. How often has a day like yesterday happened to you? And then explain what happened.
Yeah, not super often. Like, there's always going to be delays here and there, obviously. In Orlando the other week, my luggage didn't make it with me, so they had to give it to me the next day, which had happened before. Like, stuff happens when you fly. Yesterday was just sort of its own beast. So I got an alert toward the end of the Raptors game that my flight the following day, it was like a 10 a.m. flight, got canceled. And it was a flight from Toronto routing through Detroit to Washington, D.C., where I currently am now. And I rebooked a different flight. I left at 7:45 a.m., routing through Atlanta. So I booked that flight, got up at 5 a.m., boarded the flight at 7 a.m. The plane had a mechanical issue, and we were on the tarmac for 6 hours. So we did not actually take off until 1 p.m. Like, it was early. I covered the game the night before, so I boarded and then fell asleep. I woke up at 10 thinking, okay, I'm sure we landed, and we were still at the gate. We hadn't even taken off. So finally we take off at 1. I missed my connection in Atlanta because we were on the tarmac for 6 hours. So they rebooked me on the flight for 6 p.m. And I was texting you guys because we were initially going to record last night. I was trying at 9 p.m. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm supposed to land at 7, so I should be able to get to the hotel in time. And it's like, okay, it got delayed 15 minutes. Okay, it got delayed 40 minutes. Okay, it got delayed 30 minutes. So it just keeps getting pushed back incrementally.
Was there no direct flight from...
I usually fly Delta. There just wasn't a direct flight from from Toronto to DC. That's why I had a layover. I almost always fly direct, but I also try to stick with one airline as much as I can so that I don't have points split between 3 different airlines. So yeah, that's pretty much what happened. But anyway, I boarded the flight last night at 8 p.m. and then we sat on the tarmac for another hour and a half. So I spent 7.5 hours yesterday just sitting on tarmac, waiting to leave. And then finally landed in DC around 11 p.m. From 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., I was either on a flight or at an airport. So it was, I don't think I've ever had a day quite like that where I'm just sitting on tarmac. And I guess the weather was bad. I didn't see any tornadoes or hurricanes or anything. So I'm not sure what caused all that. But we're here, we made it, and now we're in DC for a few days because they played tonight and then Thursday as well. So happy I won't have to deal with any airplanes or flights or any of that for the next few days.
Okay, before we get into kind of what's happened the last few games, 3 or 4 games, and the stretch coming up, I was going to ask you about March Madness. I don't know how much you've gotten an opportunity to look at it. I guess if you were sitting on the tarmac for 6 hours, maybe you got a chance to check out the bracket. I know more so Michigan State. Any thoughts on their seeding or their matchups or anything, because this is one of the most exciting weeks for me. And this starts tonight, obviously, with the first 4 play-in games or whatever they call them these days. We have a great matchup tonight for Pistons fans. It depends on who you look at, but Dalen Swain for Texas tonight against NC State is a potential name to get familiar with based on where I have him on my board. Some people think he's better than AJ DeBonsa and have him lottery and all sorts of stuff. We'll see how that plays out. But if you are a little bit into Pistons draft stuff, Dalen Swain tonight for Texas is a name that could potentially be in the range of where Detroit could pick, depending on how all this stuff with Minnesota goes. But back to Michigan State. Any quick thoughts on them and where they're at in the bracket and their matchups?
Yeah, figured Michigan would be a top seed given how good their season's been. They've been dominant. Figured Michigan State they were in line to be a 2. I thought they probably fought to a 3 after they lost the opening game of the Big Ten, and that's what happened. Michigan State, once again, is in the same region as Duke, which
I saw that.
happens every single year. These two teams are just fated to face each other every single year. Hopefully they face each other. Hopefully Michigan State makes it that far. I don't care if Duke makes it that far, so I say hopefully. I must just want to see Michigan State get there. If Duke doesn't make it, that's fine. We'll see. Like I feel like the Michigan State runs feel sweeter when they have to get through Duke, because then it's like, okay, like you got through a blue blood, and like those teams will just have some classic battles over the years, and that's always fun. But no extreme, like, gripping thoughts overall. I feel like every Michigan State game over the last 2 weeks has taken place during a Pistons game, so I just didn't really get to watch them down the stretch like I wanted. That Big Ten game started in the middle of their Grizzlies game last week. That Michigan game, I think, was during the Orlando game. Yeah, other key games are in the middle of Pistons games. Hopefully I'll be able to watch them a little bit this week in the tournament. But we'll see. Obviously, I'm a green guy, I'm a Michigan State guy. Bleed green, would love to see another Final Four, if not a national championship, added to the Izzo resume. So we're locked there. We'll see what happens.
All right, just real quick on this, and then I promise we'll get to Piston stuff. Michigan-wise, I just will want to note that in terms of their draw, obviously they got to win their first round matchup. I think they have a tough draw in the second round with Georgia or St. Louis, but then they will get potentially shorthanded matchups in the Sweet 16. Texas Tech's probably best college basketball player is not available, tore his ACL, JT Toppin. Alabama is going to be short-handed in their backcourt. And so I think they may have ended up with a decent draw there as the 1 seed, which as the 1 seed, they should. But that second round matchup will be interesting. I will quickly run through some names for Pistons fans as we had the question, where's the pick in the draft? It is 1 pick. It can be swapped with the Timberwolves, but only if it's between 20 and 30. If the Timberwolves would fall in the standings and they would end up with like 19, they can't swap that. It's protected 1 through 19. So it would be the highest the Pistons will pick is 20th. So just some names real quick. If you're watching Duke, Isaiah Evans is a floor spacing kind of wing that you would want to keep eyes on. Houston has Chris Sanak. And so if you're watching a Houston game, that would be somebody. Iowa State has Joshua Jefferson. He's kind of like a 3-4 hybrid, older player there. Santa Clara, Allen Grays actually comes off the bench for them, but he's a real popular name for people right now. Omari Allen is a freshman for Alabama, who I think ends up higher than Detroit, but could be a name there. Texas Tech has Christian Anderson, which is a smaller guard, but one of the best floor spacer shooters in the draft. Obviously, people know Yaxel Lindenborg with Michigan, and that's probably about it in terms of names that Pistons fans should be familiar with. Omari, are you familiar with any of those guys, or any of those names stand out to you?
No, not really. I've not been super deep into the draft bag this year. I mean, I've probably seen Jackson the most just with him being from Michigan, but I haven't even been able to watch them as much. It just seems like these games are always taking place, when the Pistons have something going on. So I'm going to tap into the draft coverage once we get closer to that point. I've been in regular season mode, and this is the second straight March where I haven't had to do that as much, which is a nice change of pace. So I'll leave all that to you as the resident draft expert, not just on this podcast, but on many podcasts.
Well, and it makes sense, right? And last year they were winning games, didn't have a draft pick anyway. This season, they're winning games. They're number 1 seed in the East. I do think that the NCAA tournament is a time that maybe Pistons fans are naturally watching these games anyway. So I just wanted to throw those names out there real quick. From our guy or girl, Salih. Hey guys, I think I got it right last time, and now I feel like I probably messed it up. From Bosnia and Omari, help.
Yeah, I wish I could help you there. Wes put his hand on I thought it was Herzegovina, but the way it's spelled there, that's definitely not right. Anyway, it's 5:30 p.m. there. Pistons have a big problem. In their last 10 games, they haven't beaten a single stronger opponent. Wes is laughing at me like I'm an idiot for not being able to say this correctly, and he's probably right. So let's talk Detroit Pistons. I believe it's Herzegovina, but if it's
Herzegovina? Wes is still laughing, so I think you're wrong also.
I might be wrong too.
Wes typed.
He said the Omari help killed me. You don't want to ask him. I know I'm the reporter, but you don't want to ask me for help when it comes to pronunciations. That's my weak area for sure.
Yeah, man. It sometimes this podcast reminds me of just like how not intelligent or knowledgeable I am on things in terms of like time zones and pronunciations of countries and all sorts of things. It can be very humbling at times. Okay. Pistons 4-game losing streak followed by 3 wins and then the loss to Toronto on Sunday night. We've referenced that. The wins over Brooklyn, over Philly, very shorthanded Philly, and then the Memphis Grizzlies. Not necessarily impressive wins to the point of the comment there. And then the loss to Toronto. Early in the year, I started episodes with, hey, what are the vibes here? O2, what are the vibes about this team right now where they lost those 4 games? Yeah, it's 3 huge wins, but not against impressive opponents. And then a loss against a fellow potential Toronto Raptors playoff team. Where are things at right now?
Yeah, I think there's some frustration whenever you have dropped games the way that they have. I think they're 4-5 overall in March so far, which obviously is not where you want to be, not where you want to close the season. Still 48-19 overall. So, it's not like the wheels are falling off or anything, but first time this season, they've really had to deal with adversity. Obviously, they just came off of that 4-game streak. I think a little bit of frustration, no panic, but absolutely they wanted to get that Raptors game and just couldn't get it going, honestly. So we have 2 games against the Raptors this week. 2 games against the Wizards this week. You have a banged up Warriors team coming in Friday. So you have some opportunities to get back on track. But you don't want to go 4-5 through a 9-game stretch. So they've got some stuff that they're trying to identify and figure out.
What's up, Shawn? How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, I was just asking O2, trying to get his vibes on this team after the 4-game losing streak, 3 big wins against teams that really just aren't that good, and then a Toronto loss. So what's been an incredible season still have multiple game lead on, the rest of the Eastern Conference, one of the best seasons in the NBA in totality. Where are you kind of at with this team in terms of where they're at and I guess the quote unquote vibes?
I thought the game against, let me see if I can do the math here in my head, not the math, but the schedule. So they had the loss to Brooklyn, and they didn't have Cade that game, right? The home loss to Brooklyn.
Yep.
And the quote from JB about disrespecting the game and how it can bite you in the ass. I think that was a direct quote, right, Omari?
That was, yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, they go to Brooklyn, and you could tell a minute into the game, the attention was completely different. It was the vibe, everything was different. They were focused in a way it just hadn't been, and not just for the losing streak, but since the All-Star break, other than that Knicks game, they just, even against the Spurs, the home Spurs game, they were weirdly flat for a while to start. And sometimes that happens. So you go through lulls. But anyway, so in the Nets, you could tell. And then against the Sixers back home, they had the same, I thought, attention to detail, except maybe in the second quarter, they got lost. And I wrote about this, actually. Bryce, there was a moment, I want to say it was in the second quarter, where Duran lost his guy. Was it Dominic Barlow, maybe? And hit a jumper from maybe the elbow. I don't know. Maybe it was a little further in. And he was wide open. And Duran kind of raised his hand like, my bad. And you could hear JB from the sideline clapping at him saying, JD, pay attention, focus. And that's the thing. And I don't know how much you guys have talked about this whole narrative that they're a try-hard team, to me is just ridiculous that it's all about effort. There's a difference between effort and try hard and their defensive talent. But that defensive talent doesn't work if they're not paying attention, and they got to be connected. Obviously, when they don't have Thompson, it all goes out the window. But if every team could play defense the way they do by trying hard, then every team in the playoffs would be a good defensive team. And that's just not the case. They are a gifted physically and skill at the skill level defensive team. And they have lost their way with that a little bit. And to me, I'm going to be curious as they've gotten it back a little bit. To me, the rest of the season, I'm going to be curious to see if they can get that back, because that's how they're going to survive in the playoffs.
So you think, I agree with you. I think it can be disingenuous or unfair to call them a try-hard team. I do think they play harder than some teams do on a night in and night out basis. But I do think there's been a step back. So for you, is that more the focus that you mentioned, where it's just like, hey, this is an 82-game schedule, and right now maybe they're in quote-unquote the dog days or whatever cliche you want to use, but there obviously has been a little bit of something missing here. So are you just thinking that's more of, hey, the lack of focus right now isn't where it needs to be, but that is something you can lock in down the stretch and then going into the playoffs here in a month?
That's where I'm at. I mean, and maybe that's not a popular opinion, but let's take the Cleveland game. They didn't have Donovan Mitchell a couple of weeks ago at Cleveland. Cade shoots, off the top of my head, 4 for 16, was it worse than that, Omari? I can't remember. They didn't really make shots. They get back into the game because Ausar Thompson's just ridiculous, whatever it is that he does, however you want to describe it. Nobody else in the league is like him. Well, we can talk about that in a sec. But they get back and have a chance to win that game because of him. You can say, okay, they didn't make threes, and they didn't. And Kid Cunningham didn't shoot well at all, and he didn't. And they can't win if he does. But that's not true. If he had closed out even twice, then maybe they win that game, right? And he admitted it after the game that he was in la-la land. His closeouts, especially in the corners, were awful that game. And the whole team was, except for maybe Thompson. So if they weren't focused there, they could have won that game. Now, admittedly, they didn't have Mitchell without really making any more shots if they had played the way they can play. Now, that's a tight margin for error, but yeah, I think that they can get that back. We'll see.
All right, let's go to a short break. Whenever we come back, O2, let's start taking a look ahead. Shawn mentioned the, bounce back against the Nets. They, as we've mentioned already, they have a few games coming up here where they should be able to handle a team if they are focused. I'm interested to get Shawn's thoughts on what that will look like starting tonight against the Wizards in the first of two.
All right, we are back. Of course, this seems in a low. Like you said, we have an opportunity to see them get back on track potentially with some quote unquote weaker opponents coming up. You say that, but they've also dropped a couple of games against these guys, so can't underestimate them. Shawn, I guess if you had to identify some areas this team has struggled in, whether it's the physicality not being there, where do you want to see them get back on track tonight in the first of these two games against the Wizards?
Communication, connectedness defensively. I mean, again, I don't want to keep beating this, and they need Thompson, Ausar, to feel. I mean, he was a little rusty, right? He was on a minutes restriction the other night against Toronto. They need him to be who he is. And I would just say real quickly at a big picture level, just think about what they have for a second. So they've got, I'm going to argue, the second best defensive player in the NBA right now. Stan Van Gundy recently called Thompson the best on-ball defender, perimeter on-ball defender, and maybe his brother's right there with him. I don't know that he's quite there with him. He's got a little bit more to worry about offensively. But so just that in a vacuum, okay, that's great. But that's not just what he does, is it? He also he's the best ball screen navigator that I may have ever seen. And I know that sounds ridiculous to say. I've never seen anybody slip and slither at his size through ball screens. He sort of levitates through there and blows things up. He also anticipates. He's got a tiny bit of Draymond Green in him. I'm not saying he's Draymond, but he sees things out in the edges on the perimeter in a way that's just uncanny. So he can combine all these different facets of defense into one ridiculous athletic package that can wreck a game. So they've got that. Then they got Stewart, who's one of the 2 or 3 best rim protectors outside of Wemby, and also is pretty good out on the perimeter. And his timing, think about him. He's 6'8". He's not super athletic. What's his gift? Unbelievable anticipation. He sees what's about to happen, and he's got those long arms. Those two guys right there. Then K is one of the better two-way guards in the league, right? His shot blocking as a guard is fantastic. Again, it's timing. So you combine those things. Duren got a little bit better, yes, and then there's some effort-related stuff. You got some guys off the bench, but you start right there. If you tap into that and then communicate around that, then that's why we saw Omari. You've read about this several times. They had a stretch where they weren't just the second best defense; they were the best defense for 6 weeks, 2 months.
Yeah, around like January, December, especially when OKC had their slump. Yeah, the Pistons were number one.
Exactly, and they're maybe probably not quite OKC or even San Antonio because Wemby just. How do we even explain that? Right? I mean, where guys come around a screen and hesitate like Cunningham did to pull up at the free throw line to shoot a jump shot. I mean, have you ever seen Cunningham be that hesitant? Anyway, but they're good enough to me, if they focus in to have a run. I don't know what kind of run, but to have a run. But the number one thing is they got, it's not the effort, it's the focus and the paying attention around their defensive sort of savants to be who they can be on that end of the floor. Cause that drives it drives everything.
I think I've had more notes recently on the Substack of, man, there was a miscommunication. Man, there was them not getting matched in transition. And it was like, am I being nitpicky right now? But I tried to think back throughout the season. It's just like, no, I don't remember those things standing out where two guys ran to one guy and then one guy's wide open. And that's, I think to your point, that's not necessarily a try thing. That's just like a focus thing. It's a communication thing. And it just seemed like there were very few of those type of mistakes through the first 50 games of the season. And then they've reared up a little bit here recently. Here's what I say about Ausar, just because people will argue the value of big versus perimeter defenders in the NBA. And without having to I just think he's clearly the best perimeter defender in the NBA right now. And so, Wemby is going to win DPOY and all of that. But Ausar, and here's what I will also say, I thought Amin was as good as him, if not better defensively coming into the year. That's not even close to true right now. I mean, I'm watching the Rockets Lakers game from last night, not as we speak, but before we started recording, and you just don't see Amin's same level of disruption and everything else that Ausar provides. I want to ask you this real quick, Shawn. I actually have two kind of questions around this. I agree with everything you said about the high-end defensive impact of these guys. Here's a little bit of an intrusive thought I have about this team. Can they survive Duncan Robinson and where I think Tobias Harris is at defensively right now, which is a little bit concerning in terms of his ability to move on the perimeter and stuff like that? Do you think all of that insulates? I know Duncan is better than probably what he gets credit for, but do you have any worries about their defense in general with a Duncan Robinson and where Tobias is at? Or do you think that all gets hashed out in the playoffs and it'll be okay?
No, I absolutely have some concern in the playoffs in particular because they're gonna hunt Robinson. Right? You hate to say that. I wouldn't use that kind of a violent term or whatever, but they're going to seek him out. They're going to go after him. And you're right, Harris is not the same. If Harris's 3-point percentage and shooting hadn't also kind of fallen off a little bit, you could say, well, he may, and he does make up for it offensively, especially late in games on the block. How many times has he done that this year? He gets the bucket that either wins the game, or he gets the bucket where it goes from 2 to 4 or something like that, or even 4 to 6. He's done a lot of that this year. So there's still a lot of value with him. And Robinson, the thing about Robinson too is, there's some nights where he doesn't offset that defense. I hate to call him streaky. He's not maybe quite as streaky as Beasley was, but it's getting to that point. No, that's absolutely a concern. And those are the two spots moving forward. And God, I don't want to jump ahead, but that's where we're all thinking about, right? For them to get to where they are right now to a championship level, they're going to have to figure out. This is how I look at it. Omari and I talked about this recently. They've got 3 guys and maybe a fourth if you want to include Holland, but they got Cade, Duren, and Thompson. That's potentially a great 3 core. They got to figure out the pieces around that if they want to win a title, right? And they don't have to do that this year, I don't think. That's why they didn't. They didn't make a move they made a move at the deadline that actually may help them. Speaking of Duncan Robinson, Herter might find his way into some of those minutes in the playoffs because he's a better defensive player.
That's what I wanted to ask you. What are the answers? What do you we've had some questions, in the comment part, and we'll get to some of those things as well. We appreciate you guys as always. But what do you think maybe are the solutions? Is it is Kevin Huerter. I've loved his 3-point shot diet over the last 3 games. I feel like he's leaned more into the 3-point jumper where he looked a little hesitant earlier. I'm starting to lean into a little of Javonte Green. Javonte Green shoots like 50% from the corners and really defends. Is it Stu at the 4? I guess my question is, Shawn, if you get into a game 6, game 7 of a playoff series and the Duncan Robinson and or Tobias Harris defensive infrastructure is breaking down and maybe they're not giving you that offense, what are some of the potential solutions that you see? The roster is what it is. We can worry about the offseason in the offseason. This current iteration, what are the answers you potentially see?
I think you just said it. I mean, I think some of their very best ball this year, they had some instances where it was Duren and Stewart at the 5 and the 4, right? Because Stewart can stretch the floor a little bit. And his defense has been, especially before the suspension, I mean, I think he'll find his way back, but it's been so good. And then you're right about Green. And the thing about Huerter, and I think Omari and I, maybe we talked about this when I saw him at the Philly game. I'm trying to remember Omari, but think about Huerter when he came into the Spurs game in San Antonio. He immediately started closing out and rotating. The defense looked completely different with him in there, didn't it? And that's when they started their comeback. It wasn't just, he made a couple of shots. He made a 3 and he had a nice little kind of runner drive when he came from the left and right. Maybe it was more of a floater. And that was great. That was a bonus. But immediately their defense changed. And he knew exactly where to be. It's not that he's going to be super, super sticky on the ball, but compared to Robinson for sure. But you could feel it. You could feel him defensively. So between he and Green, and then we'll see what JB does. I know he loves Harris, and maybe Harris is in the last couple of minutes. And maybe if it's an opponent and they just can't get buckets, he'd be reluctant. But boy, I sure would try Duren and Stewart. That's by far their best offensive team.
O2, real quick, I want to give this net rating on Javonte Green, Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren. 3-player lineup has a positive 19.8 net rating in 245 minutes. Those 3 have shared the floor together 245 minutes. Obviously, that net rating stuff isn't an end-all, be-all. I don't always love that, but just thought that was interesting, O2.
No, definitely. How concerning, if at all, is the recent stretch for you, Shawn? Because like you said, we're seeing them just not do things that they've done all season. And you never want to put too much emphasis into any 9-game streak in any season, right? Like, I think teams naturally have ebbs and flows over the course of the season. But we are a little bit under 4 weeks out from the end of this season. You don't have Stu for the next week. The team announced earlier today that, he's got the left calf strain. He already missed the game in Toronto. He's out tonight. Will be out at least the next week. Where's the concern level at for you that this team's figuring some things out now? Or is there any concern for you at all? Do you just see this as a natural part of the regular season and this is something that you feel they'll work out and get back on track before the playoffs start?
I mean, there's a little bit of concern. I mean, obviously, Stewart needs to be healthy. Thompson needs to get back and kind of rediscover his flow because he's important offensively too, I think. And maybe not in shooting, but we've talked about this before in this pod, and you can watch what he does offensively, right? He gives them outlets, the cutting, some of the screening. He's gotten a little bit better at attacking. The finishing, obviously, is another summer or two probably away. But no, I think that's the main thing, because you saw it in Toronto the other night. They don't have Stewart, and Thompson's on a minutes restriction, and they give up whatever what they give up, 60 points in the third quarter. I can't remember what it was, Omari, but they're going to be vulnerable to that. So I think as long as they're healthy and they get a little bit of that focus back, which they've shown signs of. And JB talked about that, right? That night of the Philly game, that sometimes you have to go through that. You got to feel that. You got to feel that embarrassing kind of that humbling loss like they did against the Nets. This is still a fairly young team. Uncle Harris can talk about all he wants, but you got to go through it. You got to feel that. So I wouldn't worry too much, but yeah, a little bit because of, a calf strain that can be, we know what that could lead to. I'm not saying that it's going to go there, but they have to be careful with something like that, right?
MC313 says, what sunk us against the Raptors felt like I got a haircut at the first and then we were down for no reason. Was Asar Rust a problem? So I wanted to just kind of finish on the Asar thing because that was the second part of my question when you brought up his defenses. Where are you at on the offense, Shawn? What is this going to look like in the playoffs? I would just quickly say I made the argument maybe a month or two ago, like, hey, let's stop trying this Asar on-ball stuff. Let's get him off the ball and let him leaning into the baseline cuts and the offensive rebounds and all of those things. You may disagree with that, but just kind of curious where Obviously, he looked rusty, I think, in that first game back. But what do you think an Asar Thompson offensive usage looks like a month from now when they're playing game 1 of the first round of the playoffs?
Maybe occasionally he's on the ball if he gets a rebound and brings it up, but not as much as they were deliberately trying to do that earlier this season. I'm with you, Bryce, a little bit more off ball. And I know the spacing is a little bit tough, but the way they play when they are focused and in tune with each other and the chaos that they can create. Okay, fine. Maybe it not be there quite as much in the playoffs, but it's still going to be there to a degree. Because if we're saying it's not, then we're saying that every team is just going to try as hard and every team is going to be equally defensively and the Pistons aren't going to have any of their own superpowers, which is just not true. It's just not. It's just the other thing to me that's really critical is Cade has looked a little, I don't want to say tired, but he had a little stretch there where, and you saw it maybe more defensively than offensively, but you saw it offensively too. When he slips defensively, that's always the key. That's always a clue, rather. That he's not quite himself and he's not quite as aggressive offensively. He doesn't quite have the lift on the jump shot, but since, on the other hand, since his wrist has been better, he shot the ball. And I think Omari's written about this too. He shot the ball from 3. This is probably his best stretch of his NBA career, right? Plus 40% over 9-10 games, something like that. You can see it. It looks better. To me, that's the other thing. If he can find another win, which I bet he will, he can be the engine and combine with that defense and then the work he does with Duren, and they got to have, Robinson or Herter or Javonte Green hit a few shots because Danis Jenkins, by the way, he doesn't look like he's going to make a shot the rest of the season.
I definitely want to touch on that real quick before you go to O2. Speaking on Cade Cunningham, he is 24th in the NBA in total minutes this season. He crossed the 2,000-minute threshold here recently. So just a ton of minutes from Cade Cunningham. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. You got to play minutes and you got to play your stars and all of that. But I mean, it is worth noting to your point there.
I did want to address this from Wes. He brought up the NBA is weird in March and April. We saw firsthand during those bad Pistons seasons, like the Malachi Flynn 50-point game. I think Sadiq had his 50-point game. You see weird results in March, whether that's just teams starting to look ahead to the playoffs, or teams tanking harder, whatever it may be. I think you see slippage on both ends. I guess, do you subscribe to the March weirdness at All-Star? Because you don't want to underestimate or, I guess, devalue some very real issues that they are having. But I mean, again, along with that, this game had a pretty substantial 55 game sample size of strong defense until this post All-Star slippage.
Yeah, I don't have the science to back this up, but I do subscribe to it. I don't know that it's March. I think it's the Steve Kerr's point. It's the number of games, and you get to a point where it starts to wear you down. And I know it's easy, especially for people my age who loved the NBA in the 80s and 90s, and I did. But Kerr and others that feel the way that point this out, they're right. The metrics and analytics back this up. There's a lot more running and movement on an NBA court right now than there's ever been. The pace, the popular, not the popular, but the narrative about how they don't defend, that's just ridiculous. Of course they do. And I think there's probably why we see some of the injuries that we do. And maybe there's always been a lull this time of the year, just psychologically, but it feels more physical along with psychological now because of the nature of the way this game is played and what it demands. And I think that's partly why we see some of the weirdness.
I will quickly just say this as well, just pulling up post All-Star break numbers. Detroit is 8th in offensive rating post All-Star break. Detroit is still 11th in defensive rating post All-Star break. I think it's important to note that, but it's not like they've been a bottom 10 defense or something like that. And they are still 10th in net rating. But to that point, the best team in the NBA, Oklahoma City Thunder, are 9th in net rating post All-Star break. And so the Atlanta Hawks have been the best defensive team according to defensive rating post All-Star break. I don't know that any of us would say that we think Atlanta is going to be better than Detroit in the playoffs. So even though it hasn't been as good, it's not like it's been catastrophic where they've been a bottom 10 team or something like that. So let's go to break. Mari, when we come back, I want to get to some of these questions about the JB rotation. Shawn mentioned Danis Jenkins a second ago, and I think I would like to get his thoughts kind of back on him, Karis LeVert. We can get back into Kevin Herter and some of those things.
We are back with segment 3. Hopefully my Wi-Fi is good because my audio's been a little choppy, but it seems like we're good. We have a question here from FlyMuck321. Feels like JB is testing out players for the playoff rotation. Is that accurate? I'll just I'll weigh in on this first. To an extent, yeah. I mean, I think he is figuring out what he has going into the playoffs. As you all saw, Herter was first off the bench Sunday, even with Asar coming back, and his injury is what initially paved the way minutes-wise for him to play. So I think they're aware of some of the issues that they've had shooting the ball. They're trying to find the right balance between getting some more shooting on the floor, but also sustaining their physicality and just overall identity and effort on defense. It does feel like he's toying a bit. We've seen some more Marcus Sasser in the rotation over the last couple of weeks. Didn't see Dennis in the rotation for the first time in a while Sunday as well. Shawn, what do you kind of make of the rotation adjustments he's making and what he's trying to look for and get a hold of going into April?
He's trying to find, let's go back to that Spurs game in San Antonio. Herter's on the floor. Jenkins is on the floor. I'm trying to remember who else is on the floor, but those two in particular, because Herter was helping them come back. They cut the lead to 8. Jenkins gets the ball on the wing on the right side and has a wide open 3 to cut it to 5. I'm not saying they're going to win that game, but when he got that ball, I think maybe did you and I talk about this, Omari? He gets that ball and rises up, and you knew there was no way he was making that shot. None. And it's not that he can't make that shot. It's just where he's kind of at right now. To me, think about that moment. And maybe Dennis, maybe Jenkins can get back to that. JB's trying to figure out who can make that shot. That, to me, that's partly what he's doing right now. I mean, make a shot in the moment, whether you're trying to come back a little bit, whether you're trying to hold somebody off a little bit. When your bench is going to be in the game. And obviously those minutes all shrink in the playoffs, but still you can't play 5 guys in the playoffs. So who's going to be able to do what? And I think that's why you've seen Sasser get a little bit more of a chance and Herter in particular.
I think we're going to get a real chance to evaluate these guys down the stretches. Obviously we get these 3 games, 2 against the Wizards, 1 against the Warriors on a back-to-back. We'll see who's healthy for the Warriors and plays in that game and all of that. They get 2 days off, the only 2-day off stretch this team gets post All-Star break. We mentioned that coming out of the All-Star break. And then they get quite the stretch, guys. Lakers, Hawks, Pelicans, who, like, the Pelicans aren't good, but they are a bad team that is trying to win right now because they don't own their pick. Minnesota, Toronto again, Minnesota again. Like, there is a stretch of games where I think JB is going to get a real chance down the stretch for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to get a real evaluation on these guys. So my question to you, Shawn, is where does your confidence lie in these guys off the bench? We talked about Javonte Green. I think we know where people land on Isaiah Stewart. But if I told you, hey, there's a 10-man rotation for game 1 of the playoffs, the starters are staying the same. Is it Holland, Green, Stu? And then who are the 2 guards? Are you going with Jenkins? Are you going with LeVert? Are we giving Sasser a chance? Are you condensing the rotation more? Where do you kind of land on this stuff before we get some more data collection over these next few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say without the next few weeks, but I would think it was going to shrink a little bit. I mean, to me, Herter's got to be part of that too, especially if he's going to keep shooting. He started to shoot a little bit. It's funny. I saw him play in person, and that changed my idea about his shot a little bit. It's a lot flatter than I realized watching it on TV, especially from 3, which means your margin for error, right, is if you get even a tiny bit off, you don't give yourself as much of a break there. But I mean, it's hard to change. Ed Cunningham has had to work on that a little bit. Remember when he first came in, maybe it was just the distance, the NBA distance that flattened that out a little bit naturally, but he really had to work on putting more air into that thing. And you can see him. I've seen that hundreds of times in practice where he's trying to do that. So maybe they'll work with Herter. Maybe they're working with that with him. Although you don't want to change too much, but no, to me, he needs to be part of it. You can't give completely up on Jenkins. There are going to be times where JB loves to talk about how he organizes things, and he does, and he can still finish. I'm trying to remember the game. He had a couple of nice finishes recently, but that little bit of magic he had, it's gone right now. That doesn't mean it's gone permanently. Players go through this. If he could find his way back, that would be huge for the playoffs.
Real quick, I want to ask you about Holland. I don't feel like we've talked about him probably enough through this conversation. Wes actually mentioned the idea of playing Thompson and Holland together. I mean, I think that gives you quite the defensive combination defending on the perimeter, but just where are you at on his season? where he's at in the rotation, and maybe more importantly, Shawn, just I will say lack of offensive growth just in terms of the 3-point jumper just doesn't seem like it's going to be viable whatsoever come a playoff setting. And does that concern you? And what is the answer to that?
A little bit. I mean, that's why I mentioned earlier, and to me, the core three right now are Cade and Jalen and are Cunningham, Duran, and Thompson. And then Holland would be I mean, I guess Stewart too, if you want to include him. You know, it's easy to forget about him because he's a little bit older, but he's obviously critically important to the team right now. So, but Holland is, to me, I thought that the offensive growth might be a little bit more because his form, like, it's not like Thompson's, right? And it just hasn't been there. But it's not just that. His handle still needs to get a little bit tighter, don't you think? You know, I mean, he can still attack, and he makes spectacular finishes, but sometimes you want to see him finish the more conventionally and not miss it in ways. But his energy never changes, and he can change and affect the game. And there are stretches where he and Thompson are out there where they flip the momentum, and that's worth something. You know, I don't know if that's sustainable for a 12-minute stretch in the playoffs, but those two out there together can, and it depends on the matchups, can absolutely do something. But again, he's young too, so I wouldn't give up on him. But as far as him being a bucket getter in the playoffs, like you said, that doesn't seem very likely, does it?
Let's talk playoffs a little bit, because we're at that point in the season where it seems like the Pistons are going to be the number one seed. They've got 4 games over Boston with 15, 14 games left. Maybe something happens there. But one way or another, you're looking at, I think at worst, a top 2 seed for this team. How confident are you in this team making a run, Shawn? And by that, I mean not just getting out of the first round, but potentially getting over a New York or a Cleveland in the second round as well. We talk about their lack of shooting, some of their, creation issues with Cade's out, and whether or not Dennis can solve some of that. We've seen over the years teams that are great defensively and good offensively sometimes can hit a wall in the playoffs when you just need a bucket sometimes. The score is 99-98. You did a great job defensively, but you still got to score it, right? I guess, what is your confidence level right now that this team is equipped to make that type of run?
Orlando was like that last year a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Good defensive team. I don't know that they were quite as good defensively as the Pistons had been in stretches. I don't know that their ceiling was.
I don't think they were. I think this Pistons team is better than a lot of the defense first teams. They're better defensively than Houston was last year too. So.
I agree. And Orlando, the difference is, well, actually, with that Houston team and with this and that Orlando team, is none of those teams had Cunningham. And if he can be the player we've seen for a lot of this season in the playoffs, then he'll be able to get that bucket. To me, it's more about the defense. I would say the first round. I mean, that's going to be tricky. Look at the list of teams that there are 3 or 4 teams, right, that they could face, and several of them, none of them are going to be easy. Not one of them. I mean, even as Miami, right? Charlotte would have to win a couple of games in the play-in to get to them, probably, right? I think they're slotted 10. Even that would not be easy. That would be scrappy. But you think about Atlanta, that's not going to be easy. So they're going to have to play better than they've been playing and focus in and survive. I mean, not survive, but they're going to have to play well to get out of the first round, because their margin, they're not a dominant. This is an OKC last year, right? I mean, but that's not what we're talking about as a number 1 seed or the Celtics when they're healthy or something like that. So that first round is going to be tricky. I think if they get past the first round and sort of learn and navigate that, then they'll have a really good shot to get through the second round, to be honest, because they can play with the Cleveland or New York.
I think a narrative just nationally that I'm excited to see or kind of track when it changes is like the Eastern Conference has been the little brother to the Western Conference for so long, and maybe there's no Oklahoma City. I don't know, maybe even people would call San Antonio the second best team in the NBA right now, but the depth of the Eastern Conference with, I think, 4 really, really good teams, if all 4 of those teams end up in the semifinals. And then even, Orlando and Toronto are both almost 10 games over 500. Miami's the 8 games under. Atlanta and Philly are 37 and 31. My point is, this Eastern Conference has a little bit more depth and quality teams than what I think people realize whenever they talk. And it's just going to be a fascinating playoffs. I think first round matchups are going to be fun and at least competitive. And then if you get those top 4 seeds in the semifinals, right now, that would be Detroit, Cleveland, Boston, New York. Those are awesome semifinals matchups in the playoffs. Devon says, I just want to stay number one, win around, and don't lose to the Knicks. I guess to that point a little bit, Shawn, would we all agree a first round exit would be disappointing? But
Absolutely.
you get through the first round, and then even as the 1 seed, to me, I feel like they would be playing with house money there. Do you agree or disagree with that calculation of the playoff run?
I completely agree with that. And I know some fans they're not going to like it because of the record and the number 1 seed, and they're kind of ahead of schedule. But I would ask people to consider this, to think about this. And I wrote about this recently a little bit. Yeah, win the first round. Find your way, find the mental toughness, the togetherness, the connectedness, be who you are. Get back to that defensively and get through the first round. And then after that, it is house money, because think about, is Cade Cunningham as good as he's going to be? Absolutely not. He worked a lot on strength and conditioning this offseason, and you can see it. He finishes better. Because of that, he absorbs contact better, but his handle could still get a little bit tighter. His efficiency can still get a little bit better. The decision-making has grown a lot, but there's, what is he in 2 years? Or what is he even next year? Jalen Duren, look at the growth he's had this year. All right. And we haven't really talked about Jalen Duren, and I'm sure you guys have talked I've been out for the last 3 months. And by the way, it's really, really good to be back with y'all, but, and sort of on the mend. But think about Jalen Duren. He's got the potential to be, we always talk about a number 2 scorer and this and that. Well, he's got the potential to be the to me, watch his free throws, watch his fadeaway, watch his footwork, watch his ball handling, watch all of that. And then say, oh, hey, he might be a year or 2 away for throwing him the ball and telling him to go get him a bucket. I don't know that he's going to turn into that, but he absolutely has that potential. And the Pistons know that. He could be the number 2, not just a rim runner, right? Not that I want to diminish that. And then Thompson, he's not going to ever be the offensive force, but he's going to get better. So you're talking about their 3 core guys, their 3 best players who can still get a decent amount better, right? That's the goal. That's what they need to get out of this playoff run. And then Trajan Langdon and JB Bickerstaff got to figure out how to complement that as they move forward and improve. But that's what you want to see. You want to see them learn more, get a little bit better, go into the off season and say, all right, I'm going to work on this and this and this, and then come back even better next year.
Real quick here, Jake says, I still believe in the Ron Holland jumper, just not this year. I agree with this wholeheartedly. I still think long-term, he's a guy that can knock down shots. Shawn, you mentioned how the form and mechanics just look different, even compared to an Asar Thompson. And then I wanted to get to this one real quick from M. Wesley 13. You said this earlier, but you said, I'm at work commenting on a YouTube stream to say these NBA players need to be more locked in at their job. And so I thought that was funny. I didn't get it its due justice. That would have hit better during that portion of the episode. So I apologize for not doing that at the right time, but I still wanted to get it out there because I thought it was funny. O2, get us one more topic or question here, and then we'll get everybody on their day.
For sure. So this team is going to win more than likely, somewhere between 55 and 60 games, which, would be the best Pistons season since 2008. I think they won 57. In 2008, just to even be in a conversation with that team is pretty crazy, right? I guess, how do you weigh those 2 things? Because we have fans who are looking at this team and they're saying, this Pistons team is good. We need to be making a run. But like you said, they're still so young. We're seeing Duren do things this season. He's in year 4, 22 years old, that he has not done. Cade, Asar, Ron, those guys are getting better. I guess just from a mindset standpoint, how do you go into the playoffs and not feel disappointed if this team only goes to the second round, right? I think the front office kind of views this as the record is the record, but we still have to build. We've got extensions coming up. We're still going about this as a young team that's on the come up. Do you put stock into the record at all? We're 57, 58 wins. We should have higher expectations. How do you manage that aspect of it and see the bigger picture if this team were to only go to the second round?
Real quickly, Boston's been pretty good all year, but they have a chance to be even better, obviously, with Tatum coming back. Cleveland is better now. I think that the deadline really helped them. So those 2 teams. So you kind of were a number 1 seed for a lot of the year where you didn't see the Celtics and the Cavaliers that way. But now you do, right? At their peak, especially if Tatum is back to being Tatum in a month from now, they're probably better than the Pistons, right? So I don't know how you could be, if you're realistic about that, I don't know how you could be, you're going to be disappointed. You never want to see your team lose, but to be upset with that's a little bit different. I think Another thing I've been thinking about lately too. What if they had last year's team right now with Cade being better, with Duren being better, with Stewart back, with the Holland being a little bit better, with Thompson a little bit better. I mean, their core guys are all better this year. What if they have the spacing and the shooting they had a year ago and the backup point guard play? Don't forget that. If they've got Schroeder, Beasley, and Hardaway, okay, maybe Herter instead of Hardaway, whatever. But if they had last year's team with the improved, I think, no offense, they'd probably be a little bit better right now.
Yeah, Schroeder was huge for them down the stretch of last season. I know that's a guy that's bounced around, and obviously you mentioned the Cavs. He's there now, so we'll see how that plays out for them. But yeah, it is interesting. I think that's what's exciting. Devon says season has already been a success. Just need to win a round. We're good. 1 seed doesn't mean anything when this wasn't a team put together to contend for a title. I think that's what should be most exciting for fans is the growth came from the young guys, right? Jalen Duren is a most improved player, conversation candidate, whatever you want to say there. Cade even took another step forward as a top 4 MVP candidate this season. I think Ron Holland got better defensively, even though we didn't see the offensive growth. Here's the other thing, Shawn. We talk about, Isaiah. I think Isaiah Stewart has gotten better offensively this year. We always talk about the defense and all of the other stuff and him not being a young guy. He's gotten better offensively this year, right, Shawn? Would you not agree with that?
Absolutely. And you could still get better. Aaron Gordon continues to become better as a 3-point shooter, right? We've seen the same thing for Stewart. Maybe not at that level. They're different players. Gordon's not the defensive player Stewart is, but yeah, you can continue to get better. I mean, when I was young, you remember the whole idea of Bird and Magic. What were they going to work on in the summer? They didn't stop doing that once they hit 25, all right, or 26. They kept working on stuff. You see that with all really, really good players. So absolutely. And that's part of it. They've gotten better. And then next year, the expectations are going to be a little bit different. They're going to come out and they're going to go into the summer, come back. I'm sorry, we're talking about next year already. But to me, then what moves they make in the summer, I bet they'll enter next year thinking, hey, we want to get to the finals. There's no way they were thinking about that at the beginning of this year. And I don't even know that the front office is thinking about that right now. Maybe they feel, maybe they could get a little, catch some breaks and roll into one. But I don't think that's the do or die for them, even right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that this playoff run, whichever way it goes, is going to give them a lot of data collection and information on what that needs to look like in the offseason. Shawn, my last question is, will you be at game 1 of round 1? I plan on coming to Detroit about a month from now. Will you be there? Will I get to say hello and see you in person for that? Do you plan on attending the game there?
Absolutely. My goal through all this, and I've had to miss the Big Ten tournament. I'm missing the first and second round of the NCAA tournament this week. I'm hoping maybe I can be ready for a regional, but next week if Michigan or Michigan State gets there, specifically Michigan. But my whole goal through all this is I got to be ready for you guys and the Pistons run in another month. I've thought about that for a while. So yes, knock on wood, I will be there.
Okay. I love it. I'm excited for that. Shawn Windsor, everybody make sure you're following him on Twitter, reading his stuff at the Detroit Free Press. Always a great episode. Whenever he joins us, we get into great conversation. Obviously, we'll have him back here either down the stretch or once we get into the playoffs. 0-2, I'm glad your travel struggles are over for a few days, my guy, and you can just relax and do you. Well, you ain't traveling for a few days, so you're not going to have any issues, at least until then. But take it away, my guy.
Yeah. No, Shawn, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining. We'll definitely have you back on soon. Now that we're in the home stretch of the season. And with that, I'll close us out. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and a big shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.